This is the world's best gaming monitor, but pros don't use it, and the reason is complicated and worth understanding. In detail, OLED panels are often referred to as the future of displays because they deliver deeper blacks, higher contrast, wider color gamut, and essentially instantaneous pixel response times, which makes games look stunning and buttery smooth in cinematic footage and casual play. However, competitive esports is a different beast. It demands absolute consistency, predictable frame pacing, and repeatable motion clarity, and until OLED can meet those exacting requirements consistently at scale, tournament organizers, coaches, and pros will continue to favor tried and tested TN and high-performance IPS displays to break this down first. Let's talk about the technical trade-offs. Refresh rate is the headline number everyone sees, but it does not tell the whole story. Many OLEDs now reach extremely high refresh rates with some prototypes and early production models, advertising 360 Hz, 480 Hz, and even experimental panels beyond that. But there are multiple layers beneath refresh rate that affect how the display performs in real conditions. One layer is pixel response versus hold behavior. OLED pixels are emissive, which means they turn on and off individually, and transition incredibly quickly. However, the way a frame is displayed is influenced by the panel's driving method and its sample and hold characteristics. Sample and hold displays keep pixels lit for the duration of the frame, and that can create a perception of motion blur at high angular velocities. Even when pixel transition time is tiny, TN panels historically use different driving strategies, and when combined with blur reduction technologies, like strobe backlights or vendor-specific blur reduction implementations such as DIAC or similar methods, the moving image can appear sharper and easier to track for human vision at extreme frame rates. This matters because professional players do not simply want pretty frames, they want crisp, predictable motion. When spinning, flicking, or tracking a target, blurred micro-stuttering or inconsistent frame delivery will break aim and timing. Even a tiny variance in frame times can throw off. Muscle memory second is frame pacing and input latency. In the real world, a monitor does not exist in isolation. It's part of a pipeline, GPU driver operating system, compositor game engine, and the monitor controller. When any of those subsystems introduce jitter, you can get inconsistent, effective latency even at the same nominal refresh rate. TN and competitive IPS monitors have been engineered and validated for years to deliver rock-solid frame pacing under the types of loads esports players push them through. They tend to have simpler signal paths and fewer adaptive features that change brightness or processing on the fly. OLEDs include additional processing layers for HDR tone mapping, global and local dimming, and per-pixel adjustments which can introduce minute timing. Variances that pros feel as instability. Third is motion clarity and perceived blur. There's a difference between raw pixel response time numbers and how clean motion actually appears, while OLED pixels switch state fast. The overall moving image can still suffer from perceived smear, depending on how the drive electronics handle the transition and whether any temporal artifacts are introduced. Some vendors have solved this better than others, and some OLED panels do offer excellent motion clarity, but across the industry, TN panels with dedicated blur reduction modes still win in many standardized motion tests, which is why many pros and tournament suppliers trust them. Fourth is the LAN, environment and equipment standardization. Most major events use a single vendor and a single model of monitor across every station. This achieves fairness and removes variables that could unfairly advantage or disadvantage players when tournament. Organizers sign multi-event contracts with brands like Alienware, BenQ Zoe, or Asus. Those companies supply monitors that meet specific competitive requirements, usually 24 or 25-inch 1080p panels running at very high stable refresh rates, often 360 Hz, 480 Hz, or in rare internal tests up to 500 Hz. The point is that organizers choose monitors for reliability, consistency, and serviceability, not necessarily absolute picture quality. If you are a pro, you practice thousands of hours on the same exact type of monitor you'll use for LAN, because muscle memory relies on precise timing and visual feedback. If you trained on OLED and then had to compete on a TN monitor at a LAN, you might lose the subtle edge you practiced for. So pros adapt to the tournament standard rather than chasing the nicest-looking display. Fifth is durability and burn-in risk. OLED is much better than it used to be, but image retention and permanent burn-in remain design considerations for any panel that uses organic emitters when players run the same HUD crosshair and stat positions for hundreds of hours. There is a non-zero chance of retention over the long term, even if manufacturers mitigate with pixel-shifting screensavers and other protections. Organizers do not want to risk replacing hundreds of expensive OLED panels mid-season because of retention issues. TN and IPS panels do not suffer this problem in the same way, so they are favored for long-term reliability. Sixth is cost and availability. At scale, high performance. OLEDs with validated competitive-level characteristics are currently expensive to produce and in limited supply that makes it impractical for leagues and sponsors to deploy them for entire tournaments at scale 7th. Is GPU and system considerations, many pros target extremely high frame rates at 1080p to minimize input latency and keep frame times as even as possible. Pushing 360 FPS, 500 FPS or more in games like Valorant CS2 and Fortnite is still most practical, at 1080p on current hardware, even though next-generation GPUs are massively powerful. If you pair a high-resolution OLED like 1440p or 4K with ultra-high refresh, it dramatically increases the rendering load and can introduce more variability in frame times if the GPU and driver pipeline cannot keep every frame consistent. Pros prefer the lower resolution, small screen configuration that maximizes consistent FPS and minimizes latency. Eighth is the psychological and practice factor. Pros want predictability, familiarity, and repeatability. Their training regimen is tuned to a specific monitor size, resolution, color profile, and input feel. If an OLED introduces different contrast dynamics or slightly different perceived motion, the visual cues used to time edits and shots change, which is enough to degrade performance until adaptation occurs. Esports is unforgiving, and players choose stability over potential marginal gains in picture quality. Ninth is sponsorship and ecosystem. Lock-in large organizations and teams have historic partnerships with monitor manufacturers, and these companies build monitors specifically to meet the needs of competitive players, including ergonomic service support and quick replacements. That embedded ecosystem means change is slow, even when disruptive tech exists. 10th is the near future and when OLED will matter. OLED will win in competitive gaming when panel vendors deliver a true 24-inch 1080p OLED panel capable of proven 360 Hz, plus refresh with rock-solid frame, pacing, zero perceptible motion artifacts, no burn-in risk, and predictable latency under tournament conditions. Once that product is available, sponsored tournaments will adopt it quickly, because the visual advantages are undeniable. Imagine a panel that gives perfect black levels, crisp contrast, zero ghosting, and can still sustain 500 frames per second with flawless timing. The moment that exists at scale, every pro will switch almost overnight. Manufacturers are working on this, and GPU power is catching up. Drivers and API improvements are making it easier to maintain high stable FPS across a range of effects. As more vendors produce validated competitive OLEDs, expect rapid adoption. Final practical advice for players and teams. If you are a casual gamer and want the best looking experience, go OLED. Enjoy the deeper blacks, HDR, and cinematic quality. But if you are training for esports, stick with what pros use, meaning a 24 or 25-inch 1080p high refresh TN or competitive IPS monitor. Aim for 360 Hz or above. Calibrate your color profile to a neutral gamma disable post processing that adds input. Lag test your frame pacing. Using tools like PresentMon and RTSS, analyze frame time variance and Prioritize minimizing jitter over raw FPS numbers. Practice on the same monitor you will compete on. And if you do try an OLED at home, be aware of the visual differences. Practice on it extensively before bringing it to competition. Remember that, when championships are on the line, comfort, familiarity, and consistent inputs beat visual fidelity every single time. In summary, OLED is the future of displays and casual viewing. But esports is about repeatable performance and the hardware choices. Reflect that for now, TN and competitive IPs panels remain king because they are validated, reliable, and consistent under extreme conditions. But watch the horizon because the gap is closing fast. And when competitive-focused OLED monitors reach parity in motion, clarity, refresh, stability, durability, and cost, we will finally see the full migration across the pro scene, and that will change how every top player sees and plays their games.